BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. Today I will be talking all about the concept of life after death, and believe it or not, this is not the first time that I've done an episode about this on this channel. In the past, I think it was in the late stages of 2019, I did what was called a mini episode that was about 8 or 9 minutes long, just asking the question to you guys in the audience, talking about whether or not you believe in some type of life after death, some type of post-mortem survival. But recently, I've had the opportunity to correspond and discuss this subject with Michael Sutton, who is the author of the book A Philosophical Critique of Empirical Arguments for Post-Mortem Survival. And Michael Sutton is a professor, and he discusses not only philosophy but also comparative religion. But I think that we need to just lay that out as a very basic ground rule that I want to hear from you guys in the comments section. Please share your thoughts, your ideas, your experiences. And there is the basic concept of life after death in the religious sense, heaven and hell, right? But there are also a lot more, there's a bigger variety of perspectives than many people would immediately think about. And if you would like to hear more of this stuff, I would invite you guys to check out the show AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube. It is also hosted by me, Ned DeHaan, and it covers a lot about astrology, psychology, as well as things like personality traits and just responding to some people who write self-help books and such. AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube. You can listen for free. And as always, like and subscribe. And a great way that you can help out both channels is to go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel murder mystery inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. And of course, all those links are available in the description box. But other than the basic concept of heaven and hell, what would be some other examples of post-mortem survival, as it's called here, or life after death? There is a very interesting section here on page 3 of the book, nonetheless, in the introduction, that talks about not only the different types of life after death, but also how humans who are still currently alive could experience this. And I'm going to be very blunt from the beginning. I approach this with a degree of skepticism, but let's look at what Michael Sutton has written out here. And number 1, there are some living persons who exhibit skills, personality traits, and or physical traits similar or identical to those exhibited by some particular and identifiable formerly living person. Now, I think that this is more about, say, for example, if someone has the exact appearance of maybe Abraham Lincoln, just the first historical figure I could think of, and they're like, oh, he's the reincarnation of Abraham Lincoln because he has a similar physical appearance to him. But he doesn't mean he has to have any type of recollection or memories. But this would be an example of some way, somehow, somebody's physical essence, physical, spiritual, whatever type of essence they have has been transferred into a being that has carried on after their death. And there actually is a better example of this. Maybe William Shakespeare, because William Shakespeare was married to a woman named Anne Hathaway, and some people are saying that the actress Anne Hathaway married a man who heavily resembled William Shakespeare. Now, is that some type of post-mortem survival? Again, you be the judge in the comments section. Number 2, there are some living persons who can claim to remember having lived a past life and are able to provide detailed descriptions of their ostensible former life, their identity, names of friends and family, and specific events that took place in their life, which such detailed descriptions correspond to those of the life of an actual formerly living person. And the example for this one that I thought of is really quite odd, but I used to watch the show Boston Public when it was on. It came on Friday nights in my part of the country on Fox, and there was one character that claimed that in a previous life he was George Washington, and he could remember all the details of George Washington. And the reason why is because just for that, he had the information that he was able to relay to people, and then he convinced other people that he was indeed George Washington in a previous life, saying that he remembers things, and it's just that you're remembering the key pieces of information. Number 3 on the list is there are some living persons who exhibit intimate and detailed knowledge about the life of a particular and identifiable deceased person, and the information is such that the deceased person would be ideally situated to possess this information in the form of autobiographical memories. I think that this one is more similar to the book Soul Survivor, which I had the opportunity to discuss with Michael Sutton. Soul Survivor is the story of James Leininger, a boy who was recalling pieces of info that were almost like very, very faded memories, but they haunted his dreams. He was having nightmares about being a World War II fighter pilot and that his plane went down in the Pacific. And his family did some research, and they actually connected some dots and believed that he was remembering the life of a fighter pilot named James Houston. And I did 2 episodes on this one. One of them is just my take on the subject and responding to some pieces of writing, including an essay that had been written by Michael Sutton, a paper, actually, I should say, rather than an essay. And then I had the opportunity to interview Michael Sutton, who's the author of this book I'm discussing today, and you can hear that in my Soul Survivor episodes on this channel. But that one has its own complications because the boy has recalled the information, but his family was actually the ones who connected the dots. Number 4, there are some living persons who claim to receive verifiable information from some particular and sometimes identifiable deceased person where the information concerns the antemortem life of the deceased or postmortem facts about the events in the life of the deceased person's family or friends. The example that came to mind in this case was the paranormalist. I don't know if you guys remember him. There was this guy named Jim Callahan who called himself the paranormalist, and he said the difference between a magician and a paranormalist is a magician has to fake his tricks, whereas a paranormalist does not. But his, claim to fame was he said that he could communicate with a deceased writer named Raymond, and that he could even get Raymond to take over some characteristics, and that he would even allow Raymond to take control of his body, particularly his hands, and he could write messages through Jim's hands, and that the messages were almost always written backwards. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, and when he demonstrated this on television, he did it, and the message came out backwards, and you had to read it in the mirror. But Jim Callahan was also famous for getting into a very big dispute with Chris Angel, because he did this on a Fox TV show, and Chris Angel, the host of Mind Freak, simply just called him out and said, "No, that's not real. This is just a magician's trickery," and didn't provide a whole lot of details, and I perhaps can respond to that later on. But Jim Callahan also did some other things. He wrote a book on numerology, and he was involved with another feud with James Randi of the James Randi Educational Foundation, again, challenging people on their credibility and so on. But that was his claim, though, that he could communicate with someone who had passed away in some type of either spiritual world or spiritual presence. And number 5 on the list is the last one. There are some living persons who can claim to have experienced the world from outside their body, and they provide accurate descriptions of events in or features of the world ostensibly experienced while outside the body from which they were sensorily isolated. Now, the example that I thought of this one is a very faded memory that I had. I think it was from a show called It's a Miracle, but I'm not even completely sure. However, the show was telling the story of a woman who was in an ambulance, and she was completely unconscious and incapacitated, and the paramedics and later the doctor said there's no way that she would have had any ability to remember things consciously, but she said that she could see herself outside of her body, and she was looking down at her own body on the gurney in the ambulance, and the paramedics were tending to her, and she could even recall specific items that they had, such as this black medical box that had very intricate medical tools in it. So how was she able to do that? Is that some evidence that the human spirit or soul or essence can project itself outside of the human body and go on to other places? And there are lots of these stories out there. And I also want to point out that after I did the episodes on the book Soul Survivor about the James Lineker story, I just decided to get on Amazon.com and mess around a little bit, and I noticed that there were just an enormous amount of books that had been written on that exact subject. I mean, there was even a TV show that was made called The Ghost Inside My Child, where other people were claiming that their children could experience the memories or some type of connection to a previous life, and that that person's life had been reincarnated into their own child. But because I want this to be an interactive episode with you guys in the comments section, is there any one of those 5 items that you heard that really stood out to you? Or maybe you even think of some examples that are better fitting to the descriptions than what I provided. And if you want to just write anything at all in the comments section down below, you can do that. If you have your own personal experience of something that is connected to this subject, you can write that in the comments section down below as well. Or if you're extremely skeptical and doubtful, and you just want to challenge any of these things, I would also want to read those types of comments. But the next part of the book that I would like to go to is Mediumistic Communications, because this one is on page 73, and Michael Sutton also provides the different types of mediumistic communications. Like, how can somebody use a medium to communicate through? Maybe you remember the show with Patricia Arquette, and of course, this has been featured on a lot of other TV programs. I'm sure you guys know what a medium is, but someone who can either communicate to the dead, or perhaps they can even allow the dead person to embody their physical body. And the movie Ouija Origin of Evil is also a very good example of this, and the movie Ghost as well, but I'll talk about that one later on. Again, page 73 in this book. Survival researchers and parapsychologists typically distinguish 3 types of mediumship: mental, trance, and physical, though a particular medium may demonstrate more than one form. In mental mediumship, the medium claims to receive information from the deceased in the form of thoughts or auditory, visual, and/or images, including, in the case of visual images, experiences, and in which it seems that the medium is communicating with someone spatially located in the environment with particular quasi-sensory features or apparent physical characteristics. So I think that that is pretty clear. It's talking about the communication with something that doesn't have a physical form, or at the very least the physical form of this entity is not immediately present to those around it. But then, what is trance mediumship? In these cases of trance mediumship, the medium operates with an altered state of consciousness, which may range from milder forms of psychological dissociation to a full-blown trance state in which a spirit communicator takes full executive control of the medium's body and communicates verbally using the medium's voice or by writing messages, what is usually called automatic writing. I think that ties exactly into what I said about the paranormalist, and about how he could communicate with that guy Raymond, and Raymond takes control of his hands and writes the message backward. Well then, what is the final one? We have mental mediumship, trance mediumship, and physical. Mental and trance mediumship should be distinguished from physical mediumship, though in some cases both are found together. In the latter, there are physical phenomena of various sorts: knocks and raps and tables and walls and movement and levitation of objects, light and luminous apparitions, and materializations. Some of these physical phenomena are vehicles for conveying intelligent and sometimes vertical messages that ostensibly originate from spirits. For example, where knocks and raps correspond to letters in the alphabet, messages are conveyed by particular sequences of letters and and wraps. Here, the phenomena and the overlap with the verticality of mental and trance mediumship and mediumistic communications. In other cases, though the phenomena themselves do not convey any intelligible message, but occur as part of a context. So, I might be a little bit off with this, but I would say that the Ouija board would be an example of that, of physical mediumship, where somebody is somehow this spirit is communicating to people, but only through the exact use of the Ouija board, and it can direct the Ouija to little piece to various places on the board, and maybe that's a little bit of a stretch because it seems like it's also including the concepts of how there can be just sounds and noises and the lights flickering, but they're happening in somewhat of a calculated way. And I said I would talk about the movie Ghost. I think that would fall into the category of trance mediumship. I really don't like to give away movie spoilers, but it features Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg, and I just want to point out that Patrick Swayze's character in the movie Ghost is named Sam Wheat, and some of you will remember Wheat Car immediately, and there are possible some deeply written undertones to the son of Sam, but I want to digress from that, because what do you again think about that? Like, or do you know anybody who has had those types of experiences, whether it's a mental, trance, or physical mediumship? And if you have any paranormal experiences that you would like to weigh in on in the comments section, I mean, have you ever tried to communicate to the dead? And what exactly would be going on in that state in your mind? Do you think that that is something that is more about how people are trapped on Earth as ghosts in a state of purgatory, or do you think that that's just what the afterlife is? Neil deGrasse Tyson was someone who was very critical of that type of thinking, because he said based on the billions of people, I repeat, billions of people that we would have on the Earth, the amount of ghosts that would exist would just be exponential if everybody dies and turns into a ghost. And some people don't exactly follow that type of thinking. They view that ghosts would be someone who is serving a type of punishment, or perhaps they need to get reconnected to some type of physical object. Once that physical object is reunited with a particular location or a particular person, then they can cross over into a true state of resting in peace. But I would love to hear and read your comments down below. On page number 216, we have something else, though, that Michael Sutton has created here in his book, and it talks about how there could be other ways in which people could live after death, and how exactly would human beings be able to learn about them. Point number 1. Some persons survive death as discarnate souls, but in the absence of a functioning brain, they do not exhibit any mental states or even causal influence on the world. Now, the example that I will provide for this one is something that I think is only partially correct. Back when I was in elementary school, I was talking to somebody who had a dream once, and it's just that he's telling me the story of his dream, and he said that his dream was that he died, and that he had the ability to choose between heaven and earth, and he chose earth. And I was like, oh, are you crazy? You chose earth over heaven? What is wrong with you? And he said, well, if I had stayed in heaven, the option that was offered to me was that I would just be a mindless soul. I would rather experience life on earth. And all right, maybe there's something profound about that now. At the time, I thought he was out of his mind. And I think that that isn't a perfect example for this, because that would mean that his soul would be in heaven, whereas this one is acting like, I think that this point 1 here just proposes, what if someone were just a mindless soul, but maybe somehow connected to the earth in some way? Or some people also think that maybe the soul can inhabit an object, and it doesn't actually control the object, but the soul is just within there. And again, I don't like to give away movie spoilers. The movie The Mexican with Brad Pitt and Julia Roberts, it has a lot of that discussion in the ending. Point number 2. Some persons survive death as conscious beings, but their post-mortem psychological profile has minimal memorial or character continuity with their ante-mortem psychological profile. Now, I think the examples of this would be that, say someone dies and their ghost is haunting a particular area, but the ghost doesn't have any particular resemblance of the living person who used to be there, and maybe the ghost is doing some very destructive things that might not even be connected to any type of earthly revenge that the earthly human wanted to experience, but rather the ghost is just trying to destroy things. And I'm sure you could think of a couple movies that are already coming to mind, but number 3 is some persons survive death as conscious beings and both desire and intend to communicate, but they lack the ability to communicate. Again, if we're going to be talking about fiction, you must have seen a movie at some point where some ghost is watching the world after they have died, and they want to communicate to people, and they're even talking to someone who can't hear them, and they're just shouting at people to try and convey this message, but the people aren't aware of them. They are an apparition, but they are not a complete apparition. They haven't truly appeared yet. However, I think that the laws of fiction really allow us to understand that. That would be very difficult to actually pinpoint in real life. Maybe if you're the Ghost Hunters team, but it'd be very difficult to pinpoint some type of spiritual essence if we had no actual ability to communicate with them. Point number 4. Some people survive death as conscious beings and possess the ability to communicate, but they lack the desire and or intention to communicate. The example I thought of for this one was an old story that I had heard. It was called the Bogle, and it's the only time I've ever heard that word, but the Bogle just means the ghost, and it was about how every house in the town has a ghost to haunt their home, and one family feels like they've been left out because they don't have a ghost or a bogle to haunt their home, so they must not be important. And they eventually found one. He was a bagpiper, and this ghost played the bagpipes, but he was really bad at it. But he just didn't seem to have any real desire to do anything with the earthly world. All he wanted to do was play his bagpipes very poorly. However, the family had definitely a mother, a father, and a daughter, and I believe the daughter got married, and the parents got older, and their ears eventually went deaf, so they didn't have to listen to the bagpiper and hard of hearing. They weren't completely deaf, but I think you can get the general idea. That ghost just simply didn't care, so they're like, well, hey, if you don't really care about doing anything else, would you like to haunt our house so we look important? So I know these are really odd examples sometimes, but at so the next one is number 5. Some persons survive death as conscious beings, but they lack the desire. Nope, already did that. Epic failure. Okay, number 6. Only double epic failure. I didn't do 5. Some persons survive death as conscious beings, but they lack the ability, desire, and intention to communicate. That would be, I guess, someone who is a ghost, but they just don't want to communicate with anyone, and they don't have the ability to do so. So, being clear, that was 4 and 5. Point number 6 on the list is only non-differentiated consciousness persists after the death of a living person. And non-differentiated consciousness. And again, just giving my own personal response to that, I think by non-differentiated consciousness it means that there is a type of soul that would exist, or conscious energy, but again, it's not something that can actually interact with people in any type of communicative way. And number 7 is only the dispositional basis of some formerly living person persists after death. I think this is referring to, say, perhaps some type of ghost or image that actually resembles a person, but is not necessarily going to be super communicative as well. Like, say, for example, if someone catches a glimpse out of the corner of their eye and they think they see a gray figure in some way, well, what is that? I mean, those are just my takes on the subject. But in these 7 different types of ways in which someone or something could live after death, what do you think? Is there one of them that stood out to you? Is there one that seems more plausible than the other? Do you have any stories that you think would be fitting to these 7 points as I put in? And maybe other people have told you something like I said. I was telling the story about some guy who told me that he had a dream and he shared it with me. Maybe you have one that you want to put in the comment section down below. I would love to read your messages. And now I would like to move on to page 240 in the book. And this talks about something called testability and falsifiability. Now, falsifiability, my understanding of that in the past was that for something to be scientific, it has to be falsifiable, and a large reason why these concepts known as ghosts are not scientific is because you can't prove them wrong. Like, say, for example, if someone says, "Oh, I experienced a paranormal encounter with a ghost," and someone says, "Well, no, you didn't. That was just some flickers of light, or that was just the wind," and they say, "No, I experienced it." No matter what explanation you can provide to them, they will always be able to say that they actually experienced it, and you don't know what you're talking about because they had the experience and not you. But there's even a section in here called the Testable Survival Hypothesis. In the 1970s, parapsychologist Gertrude Schmeidler emphasized prediction as a crucial aspect of future survival research, and she also proposed a way of formulating a survival hypothesis open to such testability. Other parapsychologists, such as Bill Roll, subsequently appropriated several of Schmeidler's insights to further develop an allegedly testable survival hypothesis. Schmeidler wrote, "Suppose we try to test a hypothesis that makes three assumptions. Number one, that there is survival of consciousness after bodily death. Number two, that there is some continuity of personality so that soon after death, a surviving entity is recognizably similar to what the living person had been. And number three, that communication from the surviving entity is possible through a medium and or other ways." And I've already done the three types of mediumship, but these are some ways in which somebody could test and evaluate. Okay, though, I would like to actually just give some personal notes at this point, and I really do appreciate Michael Sutton for writing this very intelligent book here. There's some very intricate details of philosophical and analytical thinking in this book here. Philosophical critique of empirical arguments for postmortem survival, but also that falsifiability. It was my understanding that the one thing that is the exception that proves the rule is called a singular existential statement. Let's say, for example, a ghost actually exists, and, we evaluate it. Turns out, yep, that's a ghost. Well, all right, then falsifiability is no longer required because we now have a universal consensus that ghosts are real. But I think that at the very least, sometimes these things can be proven wrong. Like, there used to be a saying that all swans are white. Then they discovered the black swan, and it's like, oh, well, I mean, okay, it turns out that that statement is not true. That's an example of how a statement could be falsified. But the fact that a white swan exists and the fact that a black swan exists are singular existential statements. We no longer need to use the falsifiability answer. But I know some of you guys are going to be very skeptical to these types of thinking, and the first response is, of course, the James Randi school of thought. As I said, he got into that feud with Jim Callahan. The James Randi school of thought simply stated that under controlled conditions, no one has ever been able to demonstrate psychic powers through any type of scientific means, with the excluding all forms of coincidence, trickery, magician's work. But I would like to zone in on that because I've shared some of this in previous episodes. However, the term magic, magician, I think that it's heavily misunderstood. And this is my own observation, and I would love to discuss this with somebody like Michael Sutton because I'm curious what he would think, but magic is a fictitious term. Something cannot be magical and exist. If it were to exist, then it wouldn't be magic anymore. It would be science. It would be scientific. So when someone refers to something as magical, well, that means it belongs in the fictitious world. So if they're ever talking about something like folklore or cultural stories and they say they have magical thinking, if these people are intending to say that they are true stories, that's not magical. That would be an additional part of science and culture that we haven't truly evaluated yet. The other term I heavily challenge is supernatural, and I talked about this in a previous episode, but supernatural is, again, based on the assumption that it doesn't exist. well, what is nature? Nature is the totality of all the existing processes, and if you say that something is supernatural, then it is above the totality of all the existing processes. Therefore, it is outside the realm of existence. It is based on the assumption that it doesn't exist. So something is not supernatural if we are able to experience it. It's just an additional part of nature that we haven't evaluated yet. And if you think that's weird, Guy Lyon Playfair, the who has written a lot on the subject, he even co-authored a book with Uri Geller, another nemesis of James Randi, said it in a much more articulate way than I could. And that what he said was, it's not supernatural if it exists in the natural world. It's just misunderstood. And I was like, yep, totally agree. And that was the only reason why I tried to read that book, The Geller Effect. I made it through halfway through because it was co-authored by Uri Geller and Guy Lyon Playfair. Uri Geller I do not respect at all, and Guy Lyon Playfair I do respect indeed, because he is simply just one of those guys who try to answer the question, well, what are people experiencing and how is this all working? One more time, the book is called A Philosophical Critique of Empirical Arguments for Postmortem Survival, and I would love to read your comments about personal experiences in the comments section down below. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and if you like this episode, you can hit the like button. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Instagram at BlackBoxNed88, and I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.